We were lost. It wasn't a sudden realization, but a slow, creeping feeling that grew with every passing mile. The old paper map, a romantic souvenir Sarah had insisted on using instead of GPS, now lay crumpled between us like a silent accusation. The 6-lane highway had disappeared hours ago, giving way to a 2-lane road, then a single lane, and now a cracked strip of asphalt that weeds were patiently reclaiming inch by inch. The sun was setting, staining the entire western sky a burnt orange, then a bruised purple, like a giant contusion. The cold began to seep through the car's glass. Around us, cornfields stretched to the horizon, the dry stalks silent in the twilight. Not a single house, not a telephone pole, not a sign of life. Just the road and a sky so vast it was suffocating. Sarah remained silent beside me. She had long stopped pointing at landmarks on the map. Now, she just stared straight ahead, her hands clasped in her lap. Her silence was heavier than any blame. I was silent too, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to focus on keeping the car on the narrow strip of road. But my mind was screaming. We should have stayed on the main road. I should have charged my phone. I should have said no to this idea of an authentic, tech-free road trip. Then it happened. Not a loud bang, but a sudden jolt, and the shriek of tearing metal. The car lurched. I fought the wheel, feeling the front right tire give way. The car skidded for a long stretch on gravel before coming to a stop, leaning to one side like a wounded animal. For a moment, there was only the sound of the engine ticking as it cooled and my own ragged breathing. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, her voice small and trembling. I nodded, though she probably couldn't see in the thickening darkness. I opened the car door. The smell of dust and decaying leaves rushed in. The front right tire was shredded. The steel wires inside splayed out like broken bones. I kicked it uselessly, a wave of helpless anger washing over me. What about the spare? I opened the trunk. The spare tire was there, but when I pressed my thumb into it, it was soft. Flat. It had probably been that way for months. Another stupid oversight. We were stranded. Night fell completely. Thousands of stars appeared in the pitch-black sky, cold and indifferent. The wind began to blow, whistling through the dry corn stalks, creating endless, whispering sounds. We sat back in the car, the cold seeping into our bones. Occasionally, a strong gust would shake the car, and for a moment, I'd imagine a hand was pushing it. After about an hour of desperate silence, Sarah pointed into the distance. "Look." I squinted. Far away, where the cornfields ended, was a single, tiny yellowish light. It didn't flicker, just existed there, a small dot in the infinite darkness. Hope, a dangerous emotion, began to stir in me. "A town?" she asked. "Or a farm?" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Either way, it's somewhere with people. We can't stay here forever." The decision was made without another word. We took our jackets, the last bottle of water, and the only flashlight. I locked the car, a ridiculously meaningless act in the middle of nowhere. Then we started walking, cutting through the cornfield toward the light. Walking through a cornfield at night is a terrifying experience. The stalks, taller than a person, form a dense maze. The dry leaves brushed against our clothes, our faces, sounding like warning whispers. Every time a small animal rustled by, my heart would stop. The beam from my flashlight only illuminated a small circle ahead, creating bizarre, dancing shadows. Everything outside that circle of light was a terrifying unknown. After what felt like an eternity, we finally emerged from the field. A dirt road appeared before us, and across the road was the town. It was unlike any town I had ever seen. There was only a single main street, flanked by old, dilapidated wooden buildings. A few houses had lights on, a pale yellow glow filtering through dusty windows. There were no cars parked on the street, not a single sound. The silence here was even more terrifying than the silence in the field, because this was a place where there was supposed to be the sound of people. The light we had seen came from a building that looked like a diner or a general store. A wooden sign hung crookedly over the door, but the words on it were too faded to read. We looked at each other. There was no other choice. I pushed the door. A small bell chimed above, its sound shockingly loud in the stillness. The air inside was stuffy, thick with the smell of old grease and dust. 3 men were sitting at a table in the corner. They all wore denim overalls and faded shirts. When we walked in, they all looked up in unison. 3 pairs of eyes stared at us, unblinking, emotionless. An older man stood behind the bar, wiping a glass with a dirty rag. He had a white beard and deep-set eyes. He looked at us too, but said nothing. "Excuse me," I began, my voice sounding foreign. "Our car broke down out there. No cell service. We were just wondering if there's a phone we could use or a place to stay for the night." The man behind the bar stopped wiping the glass. He set it down and stared at me. The silence stretched. I could feel Sarah standing closer to me. The three men in the corner were still watching us, their gazes empty and probing. Finally, the bearded man spoke, his voice hoarse and seldom used. "No phone," he said, "but there's a room." He pointed toward the end of the bar. An old brass key hung on a hook. "Thank you," I said, feeling a strange sense of relief. "How much for the night?" He just shook his head. "No charge." This generosity, instead of reassuring me, made my sense of, we were too tired and desperate to refuse. I took the key. "Where's the room?" "Across the street," he said, then returned to wiping his glass, a clear sign that the conversation was over. We stepped back out into the silence of the street. The building he had pointed to was a rundown two-story house, probably once a small motel. We found the room with the number matching the key. The lock groaned in dry protest as I inserted the key. The room was starkly bare, a bed, a small table, and a chair. The smell of dampness and age hung in the air. There was another door, which I assumed led to a bathroom. I closed and latched the main door. The bolt looked thin and unreliable. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. "This place is weird." "Just for one night," I said, trying to reassure both her and myself. "We'll figure a way out of here in the morning." I went into the bathroom. It was even worse than the bedroom. The mirror was stained yellow, the sink grimy. I turned the faucet. Nothing came out. When I returned to the bedroom, Sarah was gone. I froze. The main door was still closed and latched. My heart began to pound. "Sarah?" I called, my voice a whisper. No answer. I checked the bathroom again. Empty. I looked under the bed. Nothing. A sense of unreality began to creep over me. She couldn't have just disappeared. Then I saw it. A section of the wall next to the bed looked slightly different in color from the rest. I went closer and pushed gently. The section gave way, revealing a dark space, a secret door. It was clumsily camouflaged. Real panic set in. I called her name again, louder, more desperate. Only silence answered. I knew what I had to do. Run. Run immediately. But the image of Sarah, possibly somewhere in the darkness behind that wall, held me back. I grabbed the flashlight, took a deep breath, and stepped through the door. A narrow, dusty corridor was revealed. The air was cold and stagnant. It led deep into the building, seemingly connecting to other rooms. I moved slowly, the flashlight beam sweeping across the peeling walls. I felt like I was in the guts of a sleeping monster. I heard a sound, very faint, from a room up ahead. I turned off the flashlight, holding my breath. Darkness enveloped me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to become invisible. A sliver of light escaped from under the door of that room. I heard voices, but they weren't speaking. They were other sounds, mumbling, wet, grotesque noises. And then I heard a muffled scream. I knew it was Sarah. A primal, ice-cold fear shot down my spine, urging me to turn and run to leave everything behind. But then the image of Sarah's face appeared in my mind, extinguishing the panic with something stronger, rage. I couldn't leave her here. I forced myself to move, inching toward the crack in the door. My heart felt like it would burst. I carefully peeked inside. The scene before me made my blood run cold. Sarah was tied to a wooden chair, her mouth gagged with a rag. The three men from the diner stood around her, along with the bearded man from behind the counter. They said nothing, just looked at her with the same blank, empty eyes like sharks circling their prey. One was holding a long hunting knife, its blade gleaming in the lamplight. I knew I couldn't confront them directly. I backed away into the darkness, desperately looking for something, anything. My eyes scanned the corridor. There was a pile of old junk in a corner, broken chairs, a few rotten wooden crates, and an old oil lamp with a little oil still inside. A crazy idea sparked. It was our only chance. I picked up the lamp, my hands shaking. I quietly made my way to the far end of the corridor, away from the room holding Sarah. I opened the lamp, poured the remaining oil onto the pile of dry wood. Then I struck the last match from my pocket. The fire caught faster than I expected, licking at the dry wood and sending up a column of black smoke. I didn't wait to see the result. I ran back, hiding around a corner near the room. Just as I predicted, there were shouts from inside. The door burst open, and two of the men ran out, heading toward the fire. The bearded man also peeked out, a confused look on his face. That was when I acted. I shot into the room like an arrow. The last man, the one with the knife, turned in surprise. I didn't give him a chance to react. I threw all my weight into him, knocking him off balance. He stumbled and fell. The knife clattered from his hand. I rushed to Sarah, using the knife to cut her ropes. "Go!" I whispered, pulling her to her feet. The bearded man had realized what was happening. He let out an inarticulate roar and lunged at us. We had no other way out but through the secret corridor. The footsteps of the other men were running back behind us. We burst out of our room across the deserted street. This time it was no longer silent. The doors of other houses were opening. Figures poured out, joining the hunt. The whole town was awake. "Don't look back," I yelled as we plunged into the edge of the cornfield. "Just run." We ran together, hand in hand. Sarah's presence beside me gave me strength. We were no longer alone in this terror. Behind us, the rustling of stalks being pushed aside grew closer. Our lungs were burning, but then, through the rows of corn, I saw the moonlight reflecting off the roof of a car. Our car. We burst out of the field, collapsing onto the gravel road. But we weren't safe yet. The first figures were emerging from the field, advancing on us. Just then, 2 points of light appeared down the road, growing larger. A truck. Hope surged. We scrambled to our feet, ran into the middle of the road, waving our arms frantically. The truck screeched to a halt just a few feet from us. The driver, a large man with a tired face, rolled down his window. "What the hell are you two doing out here at this hour?" "Help us," Sarah sobbed. "Please." He looked at us, then at the group of people standing motionlessly at the edge of the field, silent silhouettes in his headlights. A flicker of fear crossed his face. He unlocked the doors. "Get in!" We scrambled into the cab, slamming the doors shut. The truck roared to life and sped away. I looked back through the rear window. The people just stood there, watching us go, until the truck disappeared into the night. It was as if we were just animals that had escaped their trap. The driver took us to the police station in the next town. We told them everything. With 2 witnesses, our story seemed more credible. They sent a team to search the next morning. They seemed not to fully believe us, but the terror in our story was enough for them to investigate. They asked me to go with them to show the way. As we returned to that remote dirt road, a cold dread ran down my spine again. But this time I wasn't alone. Behind me were 2 patrol cars. We found our car, and then, as we went deeper down the dirt road, it appeared. The town. It looked even more decrepit and menacing in the daylight. The houses were silent, the empty windows staring at us. The police moved in cautiously. The town was eerily quiet. They began to search the houses one by one, and they found it. In the dark cellars, they found evidence of other victims, personal belongings left behind. They arrested the town's inhabitants, including the men from the diner. Their faces remained emotionless, blank, even as they were handcuffed. They didn't resist, just complied silently, as if this were just a temporary interruption. Our story was validated. The news called them an isolated cult, a deranged family that had lived cut off from the outside world for generations, preying on unlucky travelers who strayed into their territory. But for us, those names couldn't capture the full extent of the horror. Months have passed. The physical wounds have healed, but the mental scars have not. We survived, but we know that evil doesn't need demons or supernatural darkness. It exists in ordinary people, hiding in the blank spaces on the map, waiting for a wrong turn. And the certainty that, out there, in the vast silence of this country, there might still be other places just like it, is a haunting that will stay with us forever. The desert night swallowed the highway, leaving only a faint white ribbon under the headlights. I had been driving for 10 hours, and fatigue was beginning to seep into every muscle. The car was my only world, a warm metal capsule floating in an endless void. Ahead, a small dot appeared, gradually growing into the figure of a person standing on the side of the road, arm raised in a familiar gesture. I should have kept going. Every instinct in me, honed by cautionary tales and common sense, screamed at me to do so. But there was something about that lone figure standing still in the vast emptiness that touched my own solitude. Perhaps it was empathy, or perhaps just boredom after hours of not speaking to anyone. I slowed down, the car gradually coming to a stop beside the man. He was tall, thin, wearing a worn-out denim jacket despite the still warm night air. When he bent down to look into the window, I saw an angular, clean-shaven face and strangely pale eyes. There was no sign of the wariness or desperation of someone stranded. He was simply there. "My car broke down a few miles back," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "Is the next town far?" I nodded, gesturing for him to get in. He opened the back door and sat down, a strange choice when the front passenger seat was empty. The door closed with a neat sound. He placed a rough canvas bag on the floor. I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was sitting up straight, hands on his knees, eyes looking straight ahead. We started moving again. The silence in the car was heavier now. The steady hum of the engine and the sound of the tires on the pavement only seemed to highlight the stillness of the person in the back. I tried to make small talk, asking about his broken-down car, where he was headed. He answered in monosyllables, sometimes just with a nod that I could only see in the mirror. The conversation died. I gave up and turned on the radio. A gentle country melody filled the space, but it couldn't dispel the feeling of unease that was slowly building in my chest. Occasionally, I would glance in the mirror. He hadn't moved at all. No fidgeting, no looking out the window, none of the unconscious actions a normal person would make on a long trip. He just sat there, a living statue, his presence becoming increasingly overwhelming in the cramped space. I started noticing the small details. His hands, still resting on his knees, were unusually clean. His fingernails were neatly trimmed. There wasn't a speck of grease or dirt you'd expect on someone who had just been struggling with a broken car. The denim jacket, though old, had no significant rips or stains. He looked more like someone who had just stepped out of a house than a wanderer in the middle of the desert. The unease turned into a vague fear. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the fatigue was making me overthink. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, sweat beginning to form on my forehead. The road stretched endlessly before me, without a single light, without a single sign of life. We were alone. A news bulletin interrupted the radio program. A calm voice announced that a patient had escaped from a high-security psychiatric hospital in a neighboring state earlier that day. The announcer described him as extremely intelligent and dangerous, capable of manipulating others. They didn't release a name, but they gave a few identifying features. Tall, thin, around 30 years old. My heart began to pound. It was just a coincidence. It had to be. Thousands of people could fit that description. I glanced quickly in the rearview mirror. The man was still sitting motionless, but I had a feeling he was listening, a certainty that he was hearing every word of the broadcast. Then the announcer added one final detail. The patient had a peculiar habit, a compulsively repeated action. He constantly rubbed the tip of his right index finger with his thumb. In a frozen moment, my eyes were glued to the rearview mirror. In the dim light from the dashboard, I could see the man's right hand. His thumb was slowly, rhythmically rubbing the tip of his index finger, over and over. A small, almost imperceptible movement, but now it was like a death knell ringing in my head. My whole body went cold. The radio continued to talk, but I couldn't hear anything anymore. My entire reality had shrunk to this car, with a madman sitting just a few feet away from me. I had to do something. I couldn't just kick him out. He would know that I knew, and out here in the middle of nowhere, I didn't stand a chance. I tried to keep my breathing steady. I needed a plan. I needed to get somewhere with people. A gas station, a diner, anywhere. I glanced at the fuel gauge. The needle was near the red line. That was my excuse. "Damn it," I muttered, trying to sound annoyed. "Almost out of gas. Hope there's a station up ahead." I looked in the mirror. He said nothing, just looked at me. For the first time since he got in, he looked directly into my eyes through the mirror. His pale eyes were empty, but I felt as if he could see right through me. He knew I was lying. 15 minutes later, which felt like an eternity, a faint glow appeared in the distance. A shabby neon sign, some letters working and some not, advertised a 24-hour gas station and diner, an island of light in an ocean of darkness. It was my salvation. As we got closer, I saw the parking lot was nearly empty, just an old truck parked in the far corner. The neon light cast an eerie glow on the gas pumps. I pulled in, stopping right next to the pump closest to the store. "I'm going in to pay and ask for directions," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Do you want anything to drink?" He just shook his head. This was the moment of truth. My plan was simple. I would go inside, tell the clerk to call the police, and then run out the back door. I was ready to abandon the car and everything in it. My life was the only thing that mattered. I unbuckled my seatbelt, my trembling hand on the door handle. "Don't." His voice cut through the air, still flat but now carrying a terrifying weight. I turned back. He had leaned forward, his face just a short distance from mine. A slight smile played on his lips, a smile completely devoid of any mirth. "I know what you're thinking," he said. In a second of pure panic, all thought vanished. Only instinct remained. I didn't open the door. Instead, my right hand grabbed the gear stick, my left still gripping the steering wheel. I slammed my foot on the accelerator. The engine roared. The car shot forward, not back onto the highway, but straight into the brick wall of the convenience store. The impact wasn't severe, but it was enough to throw us both forward. His head hit the dashboard. I was saved by the airbag. Before he could recover, I had thrown the door open and scrambled out. I didn't run into the store. I ran towards the highway into the darkness that I had feared just moments before. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, the sound of my own ragged breathing filling my ears. After a while, when my lungs felt like they were about to burst, I finally dared to stop and look back. My car was there, its front end crumpled, headlights still shining on the brick wall. The driver's side door was wide open. The man emerged from the other side. He stood up straight, casually dusting off his jacket. He didn't look injured at all. He looked in my direction, and even from this distance, I had the feeling he was smiling. He didn't follow. He simply turned and began to walk, not towards the road I had taken, but back the way he came, melting into the desert night from which he had appeared. His silhouette grew smaller and smaller, then disappeared completely. A moment later, the lights from the store flashed on and a portly man came out, yelling. But I didn't care anymore. I collapsed onto the side of the road, my body shaking uncontrollably. I had survived. But the image of the stranger with the pale eyes and the empty smile walking silently into the endless night would haunt me forever. He was still out there. The rain was so thick it was almost unreal, like a wet gray curtain separating us from the rest of the world. Liam's old van swayed, the wipers working at full capacity, but only managing to push away the torrents of water for a moment before the windshield was blurred again. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp clothes and a suffocating silence. It had been 2 days since we left the city, heading north to a wilderness that Liam had promised. Liam, the thrill seeker. Chloe, his girlfriend, who was always along for the adventure. And Maya, my quiet best friend, sitting next to me in the back seat, sketching the blurry tree trunks in her notebook. As for me, I just wanted an escape from the monotony. It was a terrible idea. The right wheel suddenly slipped. I felt a violent jolt as the van lost control, spinning on the slick asphalt. Liam wrestled with the steering wheel, but it was too late. A sickening screech of metal sounded as we veered off the road, slid down a muddy embankment, and came to an abrupt stop against something solid. For a moment, all I could hear was the steady drumming of rain on the roof and the frantic beat of my own heart in my chest. No one was seriously injured, just a few bruises and a lot of panic. But the van was hopelessly stuck. One wheel sunk deep in the mud, and the front end crumpled from hitting a massive tree stump. Worse, there was no phone signal. We were stranded, isolated in an endless forest under a sky that wouldn't stop crying. After nearly an hour of fruitless arguments and failed attempts to push the van, it was Maya who saw it first. A faint light, flickering through the dense trees, a tiny yellow speck in the encroaching darkness. Hope, however fragile, was enough for us to make a decision. Bundling up in whatever we could find to stay warm, we abandoned the van and walked towards the light. The trek was harder than I'd imagined. Mud clung to our shoes and wet branches whipped against our faces. After about half an hour, we reached a clearing. There, a large, old-fashioned house stood, looking out of place in the middle of the wilderness. The light was coming from a single window on the ground floor. A wooden sign hung crookedly on the gate, the hand-painted letters faded with time. The Wayfarer's Inn. A sense of unease crept over me, but the cold and the rain left us no other choice. Liam went up and knocked on the door. The door opened almost immediately. An elderly man stood there, a gaunt figure in an old sweater. He had thin white hair and pale blue eyes that were oddly clear. He smiled, a friendly smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He introduced himself as Abernathy, the innkeeper. He listened to our story with a sympathetic air, saying the phone lines often went down in storms, and offered us a place to stay for the night. He said that in the morning, when the weather cleared, he could help us pull the van out. We were grateful and accepted his offer. Inside, the house was both cozy and bizarre. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, but the walls were adorned with countless taxidermied animals. Their glass eyes followed us from every corner of the room. Antique porcelain dolls with frozen smiles sat on shelves, and several mannequins dressed in clothes from a bygone era stood silently in the shadows. It felt like stepping into a forgotten museum. Mr. Abernathy offered us a hot stew. We ate ravenously, too hungry and exhausted to care about anything else. Throughout the meal, he just sat there, watching us with an almost hypnotic focus. Afterward, he led us upstairs, showing us to 2 adjoining bedrooms. The rooms were clean, but smelled faintly of mothballs. Each door had a heavy iron bolt on the inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rhythm of the rain on the roof and the whistling of the wind through the window frames kept me on edge. Through the thin wall, I could hear Liam's soft snores. Around 2 a.m., I heard another sound. Classical music, very faint, drifting up from downstairs. Curious, I crept out of bed and peeked through the crack in the door. The hallway was empty, save for the long shadows of the mannequins dancing in the faint moonlight filtering through the window at the end of the hall. The light from downstairs was out. The music was gone too. I must have imagined it. The next morning, Liam was gone. Chloe was frantic. Mr. Abernathy calmed her, suggesting he had probably woken up early and gone out to check on the van. "That young man seems like the proactive type," he said with a small smile. But the explanation felt hollow. Liam would never have gone anywhere without telling Chloe. The day passed in a state of mounting anxiety. The rain had subsided, but the forest was still damp and shrouded in mist. We called Liam's name until our throats were raw, but only our own echoes answered. Maya and I started noticing odd things. One of the mannequins in the hallway seemed to have been moved a few inches from its original spot. Another was wearing a blue beanie, one that looked very similar to the one Liam always wore. It had to be a coincidence. We were scaring ourselves. By afternoon, Chloe couldn't take it anymore. Ignoring our pleas, she announced she was going to find Liam herself and stormed out of the house. Mr. Abernathy sighed, shaking his head as if he were used to the impulsive acts of youth. Darkness fell again, and Chloe didn't return either. Now it was just me and Maya. The fear was no longer a vague feeling. It was a cold, heavy object in the pit of my stomach. We knew we had to leave, right now. We didn't care about the van anymore. We would walk in the dark, go anywhere, as long as it was away from this house. We decided not to say anything to Mr. Abernathy. We would wait until he was asleep and then slip out. As we were whispering our plan in our room, the door suddenly opened. Mr. Abernathy stood there, holding a tea tray. His smile was still in place, but his clear blue eyes now looked vacant. "I thought you two might like something to calm your nerves," he said, his voice flat. Maya refused, but I, in an attempt to seem normal, took a cup. I only took a small sip. The tea tasted slightly bitter, unfamiliar. Mr. Abernathy watched me drink, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes before it vanished. He wished us a good night and left, closing the door behind him. A few minutes later, Maya started to feel dizzy. She swayed and collapsed onto the bed, her eyelids drooping. I tried to shake her awake, but she had fallen into a deep, unnatural sleep. The tea. There was something in the tea. I hadn't drunk enough to be fully affected, but a lethargy began to spread through my body. Panic overrode the fatigue. I had to find out what was happening. I had to find a way out. Making sure not to make a sound, I opened the bedroom door and slipped into the hallway. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs. I crept down the stairs, each step creaking in the terrifying stillness. The living room was empty. I noticed a door I hadn't seen before, hidden behind the staircase. It was slightly ajar, and a cold draft carrying a strong chemical smell emanated from it. My heart hammering against my ribs, I pushed the door open and descended a steep staircase into the basement. The basement was lit by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, and the scene there will haunt me forever. It was a workshop, but not for wood or metal. Surgical tools, glass jars filled with amber-colored liquid, and syringes were laid out neatly on metal tables. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was his collection. Previous guests of the inn were everywhere, perfectly preserved, their glass eyes staring into nothing. A family sat around a table, frozen in the middle of a meal that would never be finished. A man was reading in an armchair, his finger hovering over a page. And then I saw them. Liam was standing in a corner, posed like one of the mannequins from upstairs, his eyes wide and vacant. Not far away, on a dissection table, was Chloe. Her process, it seemed, was not yet complete. I gagged, stifling a scream. I had to get out. When I turned, Mr. Abernathy was standing at the top of the stairs, blocking my only escape. He wasn't smiling anymore. The guise of the kind old man was gone, replaced by the cold calm of an artist observing his work. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, his voice still terrifyingly soft. "I just want to preserve beauty. Time is cruel. It makes everything fade. Here you will last forever." He started to descend the stairs. I backed away, my eyes darting around for a weapon, anything. I saw a lit Bunsen burner on a workbench, its blue flame dancing. Next to it was a large jar of alcohol. Without thinking, I grabbed the jar and threw it at the flame. The glass shattered. The alcohol ignited instantly. A wall of fire erupted, roaring as it spread rapidly through the room, full of flammable chemicals and dry specimens. The intense heat forced Mr. Abernathy back. He screamed, not in pain, but in fury, as his precious collection was destroyed. In that moment of chaos, I scrambled towards a small window, high up near the ceiling. I used all my strength to break the latch, climb out, and fall onto the wet grass outside. I didn't look back, I just ran. I ran through the dark forest, branches scratching my skin, my lungs burning. The roar of the fire and the crashing sounds of the collapsing house grew fainter behind me. I don't know how long I ran, only that I had to keep going until my legs gave out. Finally, I stumbled and fell onto the wet asphalt of the road, the same road that had brought us here. Lying there, gasping for air, I looked up and saw two beams of light approaching. A truck. I scrambled to my feet, waving my arms desperately. The truck screeched to a halt. The driver looked at me, a mud-caked, terrified survivor, and in his eyes I saw my own reflection. I was alive. But as the truck drove me away, away from the smoldering forest, I knew a part of me had died in that house. I would never forget the silence of the glass eyes, the smell of chemicals, and the soft voice of a man who wanted to preserve beauty by stealing life. Behind me, a column of black smoke rose into the sky, a tombstone for my friends and for the innocence I had lost forever on that road. The night descended on the dense forests of the Appalachians like a damp blanket, erasing everything except for the winding ribbon of asphalt ahead. The two-lane mountain pass turned into a dark tunnel under the giant canopies, and I had been driving for nearly 10 hours. I was running away from the fragments of my old life in Chicago towards the vague promise of a new beginning in Sacramento. My sedan glided along in silence, with only the steady hum of the engine and the pale yellow headlights sweeping across the towering tree trunks, which stood like ghostly sentinels. That was when I noticed it. In the rearview mirror, another pair of headlights appeared. There was nothing strange about that. Although this road was deserted, it wasn't completely untraveled. I didn't pay much attention, continuing to maintain my speed, but 5 minutes passed, then 10, and those headlights remained in the same position, a fixed distance behind my car. They didn't overtake, nor did they fall behind. A vague sense of unease began to creep into my mind. I tried slowing down a bit as I entered a curve. The headlights behind also leisurely slowed down. I hit the gas on a straight stretch, and the car shot forward. They also accelerated, patiently tailing me. My heart began to beat with an irregular rhythm. This was no coincidence. Through the dim light cast from the dashboard, I tried to get a better look in the mirror. It was an old pickup truck, the kind you often see in remote mountainous areas. Its body seemed rusted and dented, The original paint faded to an unrecognizable color in the darkness. But what sent a shiver down my spine was its headlights. They weren't the usual white or yellow light, but a murky, weak yellow, like the eyes of an ancient nocturnal predator. I reassured myself. Maybe it was just a bored local looking for a little fun on a long road. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I focused on the road ahead, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to ignore the presence of my pursuer. But the silence became the enemy. With each passing second, the awareness of the pickup truck behind me grew, like a tumor silently metastasizing in my mind. I couldn't help but glance at the rearview mirror. It was still there, silent and persistent. Its murky yellow eyes seemed fixed on the back of my neck, piercing through glass and metal. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Ahead, a sign pointed to an exit for a small town named Pine Creek. A decision flashed. I would turn there. If the driver just continued straight, my fear would be proven paranoid, but if he also turned... I flicked on my turn signal, slowed the car, and exited the mountain pass. In the mirror, I saw the pickup truck also lazily flick on its signal. A cold chill ran down my spine. The game was over. This was real. I was being hunted. The road into town was dark and deserted. A few silent log cabins, shuttered storefronts, the only streetlight flickered sickly. I saw a small gas station still lit, a tiny island of light in a sea of darkness. I had to stop, not because I needed gas, but because I needed a witness. I needed to see another human face. I pulled up next to a gas pump. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched through the mirror. The pickup truck didn't enter the gas station. Instead, it slowly rolled to the other side of the street and stopped, turning off its headlights. It sank into the darkness among the trees, but I knew it was still there, watching. Its hulking shadow was faintly visible under the flickering streetlight. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, and got out of the car. The mountain air was damp and cold. The small bell on the gas station door chimed as I walked in. An elderly man with a weathered face sat behind the counter, reading an old magazine. He looked up at me, his eyes tired. "Fill it up. Regular," I said, my voice a bit hoarse. He nodded, said nothing, and went back to his magazine. I walked to the glass window and looked out. The shadow of the pickup truck was still motionless. A sense of despair washed over me. This man wouldn't be any help. To him, I was just another customer passing through, and that truck was just a parked vehicle. This horror was mine alone. I paid and returned to my car. The sound of metal on metal as I closed the gas cap was jarring in the silence. As soon as I started the engine, the murky yellow headlights across the street flared to life. It had been waiting for me. As I drove out of town and merged back onto the mountain pass, it followed silently. But now, the distance had shortened. It was tailgating me, so close that its headlights blinded all three of my mirrors. All I could see was a murky yellow glare everywhere. Panic began to rise. I floored the accelerator. My car roared and lunged forward, but the old pickup truck stuck to me relentlessly. It was like an extension of my own car, a ghostly metal shadow that couldn't be shaken. Then it began. It gently bumped my rear bumper, a light impact, but enough to make my car swerve on the narrow road. I flinched, trying to keep the car straight. Adrenaline flooded my brain. Then another bump, harder this time. The sound of grinding metal. I could feel the push from behind. He was trying to push me off the road. The road ahead became more treacherous, winding continuously around the mountainside. The terrain was more dangerous. I saw a yellow sign warning of a sharp curve ahead. A crazy but singular idea came to my mind. I couldn't outrun him on a straightaway, but maybe I could use the agility of my sedan against the inertia of the hulking truck. I maintained my speed, heading into the first curve. The tires screeched on the pavement. I glanced quickly in the mirror. The pickup truck also took the curve, its massive body leaning heavily to one side, seemingly struggling. A flicker of hope. I kept accelerating, flying through a series of successive curves. My car handled them smoothly enough, but I knew that one small mistake would be the end. The hunter behind me was growing angrier. He rammed my rear bumper repeatedly, no longer nudges, but real impacts. My car cried out in pain. Ahead, I saw a hairpin turn, almost a 180-degree angle, with a sheer rock face on one side and a deep ravine hidden by dense trees on the other. This was it, my chance. I calculated in my head in just a split second. Right before entering the turn, instead of slowing down, I slammed on the brakes. My car stopped abruptly. The tires screamed. The pickup truck behind, caught by surprise and at too high a speed, couldn't react in time. I heard a roar from its engine as the driver tried to swerve to avoid me, but it was too late. In my rearview mirror, I saw a horrific and satisfying sight. The giant pickup truck slid past me, missing by only inches. It couldn't make the turn. Its wheels slipped off the edge of the asphalt, tearing through the flimsy wooden guardrail. For a moment, it seemed to hang suspended over the edge of the ravine, and then slowly, in a terrifying silence, it tipped over and began to tumble into the deep darkness below, the sound of breaking branches echoing up. I didn't hear the final crash. I only saw its murky yellow headlights point uselessly at the sky, then disappear into the thick foliage. Silence descended. I sat motionless in the car, my hands still gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I was breathing in ragged gasps. Cold sweat poured down my forehead. Slowly, very slowly, I relaxed my tense muscles. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't look down into the ravine. A part of me just wanted to drive away, to leave this nightmare behind. But another, more rational part knew I couldn't. This wasn't a movie. This was real, and I needed to report it. With a trembling hand, I reached for my phone. The signal was spotty, but I managed to find my location on the map. The next town was about 30 miles away. I started the car, the engine sounding alien in the silence of the forest, then carefully turned around and drove away, out of that deadly curve. The entire way, my eyes were glued to the rearview mirror. The town's police station was a small brick building with a single light on above the door. I walked in, bringing the night's chill with me. A sleepy-looking officer sat behind a metal desk. He looked up, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes at my panicked state. I told him everything. My voice was sometimes broken, sometimes rushed. The story sounded insane, even to me. A rusty pickup truck with no plates, a motiveless chase ending with it going over a cliff. The officer listened patiently, taking notes in a small book. He didn't seem skeptical, but his eyes held the weary resignation of someone who had heard too many strange stories in the middle of the night. "We'll send a team out there at sunrise," he said when I finished. "Can you give us an address in Sacramento where we can contact you?" I gave him the information and left. There was no sense of relief, only a cold emptiness. Reporting the incident felt like a meaningless procedure, an attempt to impose order on a completely irrational event. I had survived, but as I drove out of that town, heading towards the brightening dawn, I knew the nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. The police report might record an accident, but in my mind, it would forever be a hunt. And from now on, whenever I drive at night, I will never be able to stop myself from glancing at the rearview mirror and wondering if another pair of headlights is patiently following in the distance. The car died. It didn't cough, didn't sputter one last time. The engine simply went silent, leaving a sudden void torn apart by the sound of tires crunching on the asphalt before coming to a complete stop. I sat motionless in the dark, my hands still gripping the steering wheel. Ahead, the headlights cut a useless swath of light into the endless night of Nebraska. On both sides of the road, there were only the shadows of cornstalks taller than a man, stretching to a place I couldn't see. I had been driving for 14 hours without a break, trying to leave the city and the fragments of my old life as far behind as possible. The gas gauge had been pointing to red for an hour, but I had taken a gamble. I lost. My phone screen showed no signal. No surprise there. I hadn't seen another car for nearly an hour. I got out of the car. The October air was freezing, carrying the smell of damp earth and something sickly sweet from decaying plants. The wind hissed through the cornfields, creating a ceaseless whisper, as if a million voices were discussing some secret. The sky was cloudless, but there was no moon. The stars hung like cold shards of glass, too distant to offer any comfort. I sat on the hood of the car, trying to push away the feeling of unease creeping into my chest. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, fraught with possibilities. Every rustle in the cornfield made my muscles tense. I told myself it was just a raccoon or some other wild animal, just nature. Time passed. An hour, then two. The cold began to seep through my jacket. I knew I couldn't just sit here and wait. Dawn was a long way off, and the temperature was dropping. Just as I started to feel desperate, I saw it. A faint, weak pinpoint of light in the distance, to the right of the road. It wasn't a car light. The light was stationary, flickering erratically like an oil lamp or a candle. A house. It had to be a house. A wave of relief and hesitation washed over me at the same time. Walking in the dark in a strange place was not a good idea, but neither was staying here. That light was my only option. I locked the car, shoved the key in my pocket, and started to climb over the dry ditch on the roadside. The ground was rougher than I expected. I walked through the edge of a harvested cornfield, the sharp stalks cutting at my pants. The light didn't seem to get any closer. It was like a mirage, a moving target I could never reach. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger this time. I didn't dare look back, just focused on the flickering light ahead, my heart pounding with every step. After nearly an hour of walking, the shape of a house began to emerge dimly before me. It was an old, two-story farmhouse, the white paint peeling to reveal patches of gray wood underneath. The light I had seen came from a single window on the ground floor. Everything else was dark. The house looked lonely and forgotten. A swing hung on the front porch, creaking softly in the wind. I stood before the door for a long time, listening. There was no sound from inside, only the wind. I took a deep breath and knocked. My own knocking sounded loud and out of place in the night. I waited. No one answered. I was about to knock again when the door creaked open. An old man stood in the doorway. He was thin, wearing worn-out overalls and a plaid shirt. His gray hair was matted, and his face was deeply wrinkled. His eyes looked at me, empty and emotionless. "I'm sorry to bother you," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "My car ran out of gas on the highway. I saw your light." He said nothing, just stared at me. His silence was unnerving. "I just need a place to stay for the night, or if you have a can of gas, I can pay for it." The old man took a step back, gesturing for me to come inside. I hesitated for a second, but the cold outside pushed me forward. I crossed the threshold. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust, rotting wood, and another smell I couldn't identify, a sickeningly sweet, metallic odor. The room was lit by a single oil lamp on a rough wooden table. The furniture was sparse, just a tattered armchair and a few wooden chairs. No TV, no radio, nothing from the 21st century. A woman sat in the armchair, her back to me. She was also old, her gray hair in a neat bun. She didn't turn around when I entered. "Have a seat," the man said, his voice hoarse and seldom used. "In the morning, my son will get you some gas." I thanked him and sat down on a wooden chair, keeping my distance. I didn't take off my jacket. The man sat opposite me, placed his calloused hands on the table, and continued to watch me. The silence fell again. I could hear the ticking of a grandfather clock somewhere in the house, a steady, heavy rhythm. The woman in the armchair remained motionless. A moment later, another man entered the room from a dark hallway. He was tall and massive, probably the son the old man had mentioned. He had the same empty eyes as his father, and his face was as expressionless as a rock. He gave me a brief nod and sat down, filling the remaining space in the small room. They didn't speak to each other. The three of them just sat there in near total silence, occasionally glancing at me. The unease inside me grew into real fear. This was not a hospitable farm family. Something was terribly wrong here. That sickly sweet smell seemed stronger now. I suddenly realized it smelled like old meat. "May I use the restroom?" I asked, mostly to break the silence and to have an excuse to get up. The old man pointed toward the dark hallway, end of the hall to the left. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy. As I walked past the woman, I glanced at her. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the wall in front of her. She didn't blink. A small trickle of drool ran from the corner of her mouth. The hallway was dark and cold. The wooden floorboards creaked under my feet. There were several closed doors along the hall. I found the bathroom door. The inside was even more dilapidated than the living room. A stained mirror hung over the sink, and the light bulb on the ceiling flickered constantly. As I washed my hands, I looked in the mirror. My own reflection looked pale and terrified. Behind me, in the mirror, I could see the hallway. One of the closed doors was now slightly ajar, just a crack. I didn't see anyone, but I had the feeling someone was watching me through that crack. My heart pounded against my ribs. I had to get out of here. I didn't care about the gas anymore. I would walk through the night, rather face the cold than stay in this house another minute. I stepped out of the bathroom, trying to act normal. The slightly ajar door was now closed. I walked quickly back to the living room. All three of them were still in their same positions, like statues. "I think I should get going," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't want to bother your family any longer." "You're not going anywhere," the son said. It was the first time he had spoken. His voice was low and flat, devoid of any emotion. "A storm is coming." I hadn't heard any forecast of a storm, but even if it were true, I still wanted to leave. I backed toward the front door. "It's late," the old man added. "Stay. We'll sort it out in the morning." Their eyes were fixed on me. It wasn't an offer. It was a command. I knew if I tried to run for the door, they would stop me. I was almost as tall as the sun, but he was twice my size. I didn't stand a chance. I had no choice but to return to my chair. Adrenaline was coursing through my veins. I had to think. There had to be a way out. The window. The living room window was curtained, but maybe I could. My thoughts were cut short when the son stood up. He walked toward a dark corner of the room that I hadn't noticed before. There was a wooden trapdoor on the floor. He bent down and used an iron ring to pull it open. A gust of cold, musty air and that sickeningly sweet smell, stronger than ever, rose from the cellar. "Time to eat," he said, looking at no one. The old man stood up, and for the first time, I saw a smile on his lips. It was a grotesque smile, missing several teeth. He walked over to the motionless woman and patted her on the shoulder. "Wake up, dear, we have a guest." She didn't react. He patted her harder. Still nothing. The son let out an exasperated sigh. He walked over and grabbed his mother's arm, pulling her to her feet. As she was pulled up, her head lolled back loosely. Her eyes were still wide open, lifeless. I realized the horrifying truth. She wasn't alive. She was dead, and they had propped her up in the chair as if she were still part of the family. Absolute horror froze me in place. This wasn't a family. This was a nightmare. The son dragged the corpse toward the cellar door. The old man turned back to me, his smile widening. "You'll be next," he whispered. Survival instinct kicked in, shattering the paralyzing ice. I grabbed the oil lamp from the table and threw it straight at him. Hot oil and flames erupted, engulfing his old shirt. He screamed, an inhuman sound of pain and fury, and fell to the floor, trying to put out the fire. The son dropped the corpse and turned, his eyes finally showing an emotion, pure rage. He lunged at me. I didn't wait for him to get close. I ran to the window, smashed the glass with the wooden chair, and jumped out into the night. Shards of glass cut my hands and face, but I didn't feel the pain. I landed on the hard ground and started running. I didn't run toward the road. I ran toward the cornfields, hoping I could hide in them. I heard the sun's furious roar behind me. I didn't dare look back. I ran blindly, the cornstalks whipping my face. The leaves were sharp as razors. I stumbled constantly but got back up immediately. My lungs burned. Every breath was torture. I don't know how long I ran. All sense of direction was gone. There was only darkness, the sound of the wind, and the sound of my pursuer behind me. But gradually, his heavy footsteps seemed more distant. Maybe I was faster than him, or maybe he had given up. I didn't dare to stop. I kept running until my legs gave out, and I collapsed onto a plowed furrow. I lay there, gasping for air, listening. Nothing. Only the frantic beating of my heart in my ears. I lay there for a long time, until the gray light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. I shakily got to my feet. My clothes were torn and my body was covered in scratches. I looked around. I was in the middle of a vast field. The house was gone. I started walking aimlessly, just heading toward the rising sun. A few hours later, I stumbled upon a dirt road, and in the distance I saw a pickup truck approaching. I waved my arms weakly. The truck stopped. A farmer with a kind face looked at me through the window. He took me to the nearest town. I told the police everything. They looked at me like I was crazy, but they still sent a car out to check. They never found the house I described. In that spot, there were only the foundations of an old farmhouse that had burned down decades ago. No bodies, no cellar, nothing. My car was still on the highway, untouched. They concluded I had hallucinated from exhaustion and stress, but I know what I saw. The scars on my body are real, and the horror in my memory is also real. I survived, but a part of me died that night in the cornfields of Nebraska. Sometimes on quiet nights, I can still smell the dust and the old meat, and I see their empty eyes staring at me from the darkness.